Welcome to Stories from the Park, a Heritage Park podcast. Hi, I'm Kesia Quill, Chief Curator.
And I'm Dominic Terry, Communications Manager here at Heritage Park.
We are located on Treaty 7 land in Calgary, Alberta, a place where visitors come to learn about this history of all those who have gathered here, and where Indigenous people proudly share their cultural traditions and tell stories about their rich heritage, history, and attachment to the land.
In the second part of this episode, we continue our conversation with Dr. Michael Hawley as we talk about the history of Sikh and Punjabi people in Western Canada, and more specifically here in Alberta.
So when we talk about some of the trailblazers or some of the notable characters, we know of one, Harnam Singh Hari, who has land adjacent to where Heritage Park is now. Would you share some about his story with us?
Now we're getting a little close to home, which is always nice. When I first started looking at Sikhs in Alberta, I actually started with Harnam Singh because I thought he would actually be the easiest one to write about. There had been a number of newspaper articles about him. There were a lot of recent things about him. There is a park in Calgary named after him. We have many of his descendants, his grandchildren, daughters-in-law, great-grandchildren. Many of them reside here, many of whom I've spoken with. And so I thought this would be a really great place to start. Much to my chagrin, I still haven't managed to crack the enigma that is Harnam Singh Hari. There are many different oral histories about what happened and how he got here. And some of those oral histories map on to some of the documented evidence that we have, and some diverge from that documented evidence. And sometimes the documented evidence is contradictory within itself. I have, for example, 2 interviews with Harnam Singh Hari himself, who gives 2 different accounts of when and how he got here. So it is really trying to piece together a likely scenario. And that I can give you. It is very likely that Harnam Singh was born actually in Burma, not in Punjab, but that was where his family was from. That he migrated, left Punjab, came to North America, likely around the year about 1910. It's very likely that he landed not in Canada, but in San Francisco, and that he made his way to Vancouver that same year, where he had friends and also relatives who had urged him to come. In Harnam Singh Hari's own words, he spent a little bit of time in Vancouver, but that he had heard of Calgary and points west, and that he started to make his journey to Alberta. And he came via what would now be sort of the number 1 highway and Coquihalla Highway. He made his way from Vancouver and likely spent a little bit of time in Kamloops, in Revelstoke, perhaps in Golden, British Columbia. The final leg of his journey into Alberta, we are told that he hopped on a train, and that the train took him as far as likely Exshaw, where he was discovered and thrown off the train, and where he had to end up walking the rest of the way to Calgary. So he would have arrived in Calgary sometime likely after 1910. How long afterwards, we're not sure. The very first reference that we have to Harnam Singh Hari in Calgary actually dates from 1919. So somewhere in between that date range, he did arrive. I'm inclined to think likely earlier rather than later. As the family memory recalls, he came with very, very little, as many new migrants did. Um, he at first had a job actually loading bags of cement onto box cars. And as many in the Hari family like to tell this story, he sat and he wasn't employed yet, but he sat and he watched people loading cement bags, taking these very, very heavy cement bags. I believe they were 100 or 200 pounds each, and loading them on the box cars. Harnam Singh Hari, he was a tall man, he was a strong man, and he started to carry 2 bags at a time. And the foreman saw this and said, "You're hired. If you can load this thing twice as fast as the other people can load it, you're hired." And he did that for a little bit of time. He made his way to Calgary, where he worked at the Eau Claire lumber yard. And eventually, with the help of, it seems, a local resident, managed to rent a very small piece of land up in the north part of the city, just off of Nose Creek. To the best of my ability, I think I've located roughly the approximate place of that farm, and that would be roughly Edmonton Trail and about 32nd Avenue northeast, in and around that area. And it was there where he had earned enough money where he could buy a wagon, a horse. He started to purchase hogs at a very low price. In the beginning, I believe he had purchased 1 hog, raised that hog and sold it for a handsome profit. And he thought, well, this is the business for me. He made some really great connections with some very prominent locals. Arthur Lazel, for example, who was an auctioneer in Calgary, whose memorial and grave marker is in Union Cemetery. Harnam Singh regularly attended Arthur Lazel's auctions. Family memory recalls that whenever Harnam Singh came into one of Arthur Lazel's auctions, that Arthur Lazel would announce him as the Indian Emperor who came in. So he would have been a known quantity. He started to purchase land in and around what is now today's Chinook Center, and ended up gradually adding to that land holding until his farm expanded to what is now the area between Glenmore Trail and Heritage Drive, and McLeod Trail and Elbow Drive. So that whole area of Kingsland is Harnam Singh Hari's original family farm. There he grew crops, he raised hogs. For a while, he raised chickens. As recalled by one of his granddaughters, Harnam Singh would go around to hotels and restaurants and collect the scraps and take them back to feed his hogs in a way to economize. He did very, very well for himself farming, not without hardships, of course. And we can talk about some of those hardships that some of them are historically, I think, kind of interesting. But he also regularly gave back to the community as well, providing sometimes cash, but very often hogs or chickens as prizes for various contests and community events. Harnam Singh spent from the time he arrived in Canada right up until 1926. He himself was alone. He didn't have family that came with him. But in 1926, his only son, a fellow by the name of Ujagar Singh, came from Punjab. And shortly thereafter, in 1928, Ujagar Singh and his new wife, a woman by the name of Sujang Kaur, came and settled on the family farm. That was followed in 1932 by Harnam Singh's wife, whose name is Kim Kaur, along with Ujagar Singh's young son, so Harnam Singh's first grandchild, whose name was Harchet Singh, who, by the way, is still alive and well and living in British Columbia. He is 97 years old, and his immigration forms tell us that he arrived 90 years ago this April. Wow. And I don't know how many people can actually say that. Oh. The family did very, very well. Harnam Singh expanded his land holdings to include farms south of the city in what is now the De Winton, Okotoks area. He may have actually owned land way in the far south of the province, but that's a little less certain. And he eventually sold his farm in Kingsland in 1956 to developers to allow for expansion of the city. 1956, I believe he sold it for $230,000. Wow. So he did pretty well for himself. And so that was 1956. So he had spent 45 years away from Punjab. And in 1956, he started to make regular journeys back to Punjab, back to his native village, a place called Ranake, where he started to give back to his community, making donations to gurdwaras, or so-called Sikh temples, building a pharmacy, doing these sorts of things. Wow. And he continually moved back and forth then from between Canada and Punjab.
It's pretty well documented that he was somewhat, well, not somewhat, but a philanthropist of some degree.
Oh, absolutely. And we will see that pattern for many of the Sikhs for whom we know. We have a lot of story and a lot of information about that. Absolutely. He was very much a philanthropist. And for those who are interested, there's a Calgary Herald article from October, can't remember the exact date, October 1956, that speaks about some of Harnam Singh's plans when he gets back to Punjab and what he wants to do. Some of those things materialized, some of them he did not.
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing. What you've talked about, kind of the intersection of kind of what people, Sikhs would have kind of the overlap. We talked about the Chinese bachelor society as well, and so there was kind of an intersection of the people in immigrant communities. Tell us about there are some other ones that you've mentioned to us before about people marrying different groups coming together
right
in Calgary.
Yeah, and this, I think, is again part of Alberta history and part of a lot of Canadian history, I think, that very often gets overlooked. And that is some of the intersections and some of the relations that are cultivated between minoritized groups. And in particular, in the Calgary case and the Alberta case more generally, when it comes to Sikhs and particularly Punjabi Sikhs, is the intersection and some of the relationships that those Sikhs had with Alberta's Black community. There were a number, a small handful of marriages that took place between Punjabi men and their brides in Alberta prior to 1950. One of them was Harnam Singh Hari's son, Ujagar Singh, who married a Punjabi woman. But all of the others, the other 5, I believe, recorded marriages, Sikhs married outside of their Punjabi ethnic heritage. Some married into the Caucasian community. On one occasion, a Sikh in Lethbridge married into the Caucasian community. But there were others who married into the Black community. And that is something that is very often not referenced in histories about the Sikhs or in Black history in Alberta. Um, but it was one way in which these groups, these minoritized groups, um, could cultivate good relations and be able to cultivate sort of a family setting, have children put down roots in a way that they might not have been able to otherwise.
Right.
And I think that combination of Punjabi Sikh and Blacks in Alberta might seem like a little bit of a surprising relationship or a surprising connection. But the two groups had an awful lot in common. Both absolutely were people of color, of course. Both, of course, would have experienced exclusion,
Right.
racism, discrimination in Alberta. My understanding is that you have spoken with Cheryl Fogle, and I'm sure she has spoken about John Ware and some of the experiences that he had. Um, Both the Black and the Punjabi community certainly would have had a background or some sort of history of colonialism as well. That brought them together. So they had a lot. They had a lot in common in many ways. There was two notable Punjabis who married into the Black community. One of them was a fellow by the name of Ram Singh, who came to Calgary in actually 1915. So he was actually one of the earliest arrivals into Calgary. He lived 30 years in Calgary until his death in 1945. He married in, I believe it was 1918, married a Black woman from Mississippi, a woman by the name of Amelia Jackson. And together they had three children. Unfortunately, Amelia Jackson passed away at a very, very early age from ovarian cancer. But her grave is in Union Cemetery here. Unfortunately, it's not marked. You can find where it is in the catalog of graves, but it's not marked in any particular way. Ram Singh eventually remarried again into the Black community. So there's two marriages there. The other major marriage between Punjabi and Black folks here in Alberta was the marriage between a fellow by the name of Sohan Singh Bullar and Ephigenia Jones. Ephigenia Jones what was from Mississippi, and she and her family came and settled in Alberta, was one of the very early families to come and settle in Alberta. And they settled up in and around the area of Athabasca and that region in some of the Black settlements that were being developed in the early 1910s. Sohan Singh Bullar and Ephigenia Jones went on to have seven children. The eldest, Helen, is still with us. And the youngest, actually, her name is Judy Singh. Judi is the way it is spelled, though sometimes you'll see it spelled Judy. Judy Singh became actually a fairly well-known jazz vocalist in Alberta. Regularly performed in Alberta, in Edmonton. She was known throughout Canada. She married another musician by the name of Lenny Brow, who was a classical guitarist in the United States, and she actually made quite a name for herself. And she's, no pun intended, one of the unsung figures in Alberta history, and is a really good example of sort of the intersection between Black and South Asian, and specifically Punjabi lives in Alberta. Interestingly, Sohan Singh Bhullar is the Edmonton counterpart to Harnam Singh, in the sense that Sohan Singh Bhullar has a park named after him in Edmonton, in and around the Mill Woods area. Both Ephigenia Jones and Sohan Singh Bhullar passed in the late 1960s, but they died within about 3 weeks of one another. And the family says that they just simply died of a broken heart. So that tells you a little bit about the story and the closeness, I think, of some of these marriages.
Right. That's a great kind of connection between two communities in Alberta.
Yeah.
So, Michael, if there's a little bit more that we wanted to learn about the Punjabi community in Alberta, and where could we look?
Right now, there's not a lot of places you can look except into the archives, of course. If you are interested, or folks are interested, there is a Facebook page, if people do such things, just simply called the Alberta Sikh History Project on Facebook. It's there where I've been posting some of my finds over the past few years. And hopefully in the next month or so, there will be sort of a soft launch of a brand new website that will tell some of the stories of these early settlers and these early Sikhs, along with some of the historical documentation to go along with it. But that should be up and running, hopefully by in the next month or so.
I think it just speaks to this history that people, not only Albertans, but people who come to Alberta and to live, the realizing of the Canadian history that goes along with not just people who came from the East and came out here, but people who were here, as you talked about founders, their impact on life in Southern Alberta and in Alberta in general. It might be undocumented largely, but it doesn't go unnoticed.
No, and I think that is really important, and I think it's also important to recognize that it's not just the so-called big stories, the big lives, impactful lives. Sometimes everyday stories and ordinary lives make for some of the best stories. And Alberta history is filled with those stories of Sikhs, those who have worked unsung to help bring others to Calgary. We have a number of Sikhs who came to Calgary and worked very briefly. We have names but no images. We have actually a fellow who settled here, who opened his own convenience store, 1918, and went on to become, I believe, the first person of Indian heritage to have a private pilot's license in Canada. And he actually earned a little bit of a reputation for himself back in British Columbia and Victoria as being somewhat of a daredevil, and a daredevil flyer and parachutist. And so there's all of these types of stories, and probably dozens more to be uncovered as this work progresses.
Thank you so much for sharing this great story with us. We really appreciate you coming today and talking.
Thank you very much. It was great to be able to talk about it. Thank you.
So glad.
Thanks.
Thank you.